Title: The Inspiring Life Story of the Wright Brothers, How Two Brothers Changed the World of Flight. Hello and welcome. In this video, we will read and listen to the real life story of the Wright brothers, two brothers who changed the world with their dream of flying. This story is written in clear and slow English. It is perfect for English learners at the intermediate and upper intermediate level. You will improve your listening, vocabulary, and comprehension, and also learn many emotional words and everyday expressions. By the end, you will not only know about the Wright brothers, but you will also feel more confident in your English. Let's begin this journey together. The story of the Wright brothers begins in the small town of Dayton, Ohio, in the United States of America. The year was 1871 when Orville Wright was born. 4 years earlier, in 1867, his older brother Wilbur Wright had come into the world. These two boys were very different in personality, but together they formed one of the most famous partnerships in history. Their father, Milton Wright, was a bishop, a church leader, who believed in education, honesty, and hard work. Their mother, Susan Catherine Kerner Wright, was a woman with great intelligence and creativity. She loved building tools and fixing things with her hands. She taught her children to use their minds, to be curious, and to always ask questions. The Wright family was not rich. They did not have many luxuries, but the home was full of books, ideas, and encouragement. The children were always making things, reading, or exploring the world around them. One day, when Orville was only a small boy, his father brought home a simple toy. It was a small helicopter-like device, made of sticks, paper, and rubber bands. It could fly up into the air for a few seconds and then float gently back down. The boys were amazed. They played with it again and again, until it broke. But the memory of that toy stayed with them. That little flying machine planted a seed of wonder and curiosity in their hearts. From that moment, both Wilbur and Orville dreamed about flying. They wondered, what would it feel like to fly through the sky, like a bird? Wilbur was the older brother. He was quiet, serious, and thoughtful. He loved books and ideas. He was a deep thinker and often careful in his decisions. Orville, on the other hand, was lively, energetic, and creative. He loved new adventures, trying new things, and was sometimes impatient. Even though they were different, they shared one important thing: they trusted each other. They worked together on almost everything. If Wilbur had an idea, Orville wanted to try it. If Orville started a project, Wilbur wanted to improve it. This teamwork became their greatest strength. As children, the brothers loved building things. They built kites, toys, and even small machines. They would spend hours experimenting, testing, and playing. When one experiment failed, they did not get angry. Instead, they asked themselves, why did it fail? How can we make it better? This attitude, of not giving up, of learning from mistakes, would one day help them change the world. Their mother, Susan, played an important role. Unlike many women of that time, she was skilled in mechanics. She could build tools, fix appliances, and design useful objects. She gave her sons confidence by telling them, if you can imagine it, you can try to make it. Their father also encouraged their curiosity. He traveled often for his church work, and when he returned, he always brought home little gifts. Sometimes it was a toy. Sometimes it was a book. Sometimes it was just a story from another city. Each gift opened the boys' minds to new ideas. Books were especially important. The Wright home was filled with them, books about science, history, nature, and adventure. Wilbur and Orville loved reading about famous inventors and explorers. These stories made them feel that great discoveries were not only for special people, but possible for anyone who worked hard. When Wilbur was a teenager, something happened that changed his life for a while. He was playing a sport called ice hockey, and during the game, he was hit in the face by a stick. The injury damaged his teeth and caused great pain. For many months, he could not go out often. He stayed at home, feeling weak and sometimes sad. But instead of wasting this time, Wilbur began to read more and more. He studied mathematics, science, and literature. He also spent time caring for his mother, who was ill during those years. Although this was a difficult period, it helped shape his serious and thoughtful personality. He became more focused, more determined, and more dedicated to learning. Orville, meanwhile, was full of energy. He loved to design and build things with his friends. At the age of 17, he even started a small printing business, making newspapers and posters. Wilbur soon joined him, and together they ran a successful little company. This was the beginning of their teamwork in business, and later, in invention. Even as young men, the memory of that small flying toy never left their minds. Sometimes, when they saw birds in the sky, they would stop and watch them carefully. "Look at the way the bird tilts its wings," Wilbur might say. Orville would reply, "Yes, it controls its flight like that." Could a machine do the same? They began collecting stories and information about flying machines. They read about hot air balloons, about gliders, and about earlier inventors who had tried to fly. Most of those inventors had failed, but to the Wright brothers, every failure was a lesson. The dream of flying was still far away, but it lived quietly inside their hearts. What made the Wright brothers special, even in childhood, was not just their intelligence. It was their imagination. They looked at the world with open eyes. Where others saw only birds in the sky, they saw teachers. Where others saw toys, they saw possibilities. They learned early that life was full of problems, but also full of solutions. They believed that if they asked the right questions, worked patiently, and stayed curious, they could find answers. And so, their childhood was not only a time of play, but also the foundation for their greatest invention. The seed of flight was planted early, and it was watered by curiosity, encouragement, and love. The world did not know it yet, but two brothers in Dayton, Ohio, were preparing to give humanity wings. As the Wright brothers grew older, their curiosity did not fade. Instead, it grew stronger. Both Wilbur and Orville wanted to create things, to test ideas, and to solve problems. They were no longer just boys playing with toys, they were becoming young inventors. When Orville was still a teenager, he became interested in printing. At that time, printing machines were large, heavy, and expensive. Most young people could not afford them. But Orville did not give up. With his creative mind, he built his own small printing press using parts from old machines. Soon, he began printing small newspapers and posters for his school and for people in the town. His work was impressive, and word spread quickly. Wilbur, seeing his younger brother's success, decided to join him. Together, they started the Wright Printing Company. The brothers were a strong team. Orville was more artistic and enjoyed design, while Wilbur was more careful and focused on the business side. They worked late into the night, printing newspapers and advertisements. Their little company grew, and people in Dayton respected them for their skills and reliability. This early business taught the brothers an important lesson: hard work and teamwork bring results. It also showed them that they could build machines with their own hands, improve them, and make them useful. By the 1890s, bicycles had become very popular in the United States. People of all ages were riding them, and new bicycle shops were opening everywhere. The Wright brothers, always curious about machines, became fascinated with bicycles. At first, they enjoyed riding bicycles for fun. They loved the feeling of balance, speed, and freedom. But soon, they wanted to know more. How did bicycles work? How could they be repaired? How could they be improved? In 1892, they opened a bicycle shop in Dayton called the Wright Cycle Company. At first, they repaired bicycles for local people. But soon, they began designing and building their own models. Running a bicycle shop was not easy. They had to order parts, manage money, deal with customers, and repair broken bikes every day. But once again, their teamwork helped them succeed. Wilbur often said, "The bicycle teaches us balance and control. These are the same things we will need if we ever want to fly." Of course, not everything went smoothly. Sometimes, a bicycle they built did not work as planned. Sometimes, a repair took longer than expected. Customers were not always patient, but the brothers had already learned in childhood that failure is part of success. When a design did not work, they studied it carefully. They asked themselves, why did this fail? What can we change? Instead of feeling hopeless, they felt curious. This positive attitude toward failure became a key part of their journey as inventors. During the years of their printing and bicycle business, the dream of flying never completely disappeared. They often talked about it while working. Sometimes, as they fixed a bicycle chain or adjusted a wheel, one of them would say, "Imagine if we could build a machine that could carry us into the air." In 1896, something happened that brought back their dream with new energy. A famous German inventor named Otto Lilienthal, who had built gliders and experimented with flying, died in a crash. His work was reported in newspapers around the world, including Dayton. The Wright brothers read about Lilienthal with great interest. He had believed that humans could learn to fly by studying the wings of birds and by experimenting step by step. His death was sad, but his life inspired the brothers. Wilbur said, "If others can come this far, why can't we continue? Why can't we solve the problem of flight?" Orville agreed. From that moment, their casual dream became a serious project. The brothers began watching birds more carefully than ever before. They observed how a bird tilted its wings to turn. They noticed how it spread its wings to rise, and folded them to fall. Wilbur once wrote, "The flight of birds is the most perfect example of balance and control. If we can understand it, we can build a machine that does the same." These quiet hours of watching nature gave them ideas that would later become the foundation of modern aviation. In their bicycle shop, the Wright brothers continued inventing. They designed new tools, improved bicycle parts, and created stronger frames. Customers liked their bicycles because they were reliable and carefully made. But while business was good, the brothers' hearts were already turning toward a bigger challenge, the challenge of flight. They began reading everything they could find about flying machines. They studied books, magazines, and scientific papers. They learned about earlier inventors who had tried and failed. They made notes, compared ideas, and began forming their own theories. At night, after the shop closed, they would sit together and talk for hours. Sometimes they argued, sometimes they laughed, but always they returned to the same question: how can we make a machine that really flies? One of the most important parts of their journey was their trust in each other. Many brothers fight or go in different directions as they grow older. But Wilbur and Orville stayed close. They respected each other's strengths. Wilbur admired Orville's creativity and courage. Orville admired Wilbur's careful thinking and patience. They shared responsibilities equally and never let pride or jealousy divide them. This strong partnership gave them the power to continue, even when the dream seemed impossible. By the end of the 1890s, the Wright brothers were no longer just bicycle makers. They were inventors, thinkers, and dreamers with a clear goal. Their bicycle shop gave them money to support their experiments. Their experiences with machines gave them skills in building and repairing. Their habit of careful observation gave them ideas. And most importantly, their partnership gave them strength. The world around them did not yet know, but history was quietly preparing itself. Two brothers in Dayton were about to take the first steps toward one of the greatest inventions of all time. Curiosity is the feeling that makes us ask questions, search for answers, and look more deeply at the world. For the Wright brothers, curiosity was not just a small part of life, it was the heart of their journey. Without curiosity, they would never have become the inventors of the airplane. By the late 1890s, the Wright brothers were busy with their bicycle shop during the day. But at night, they were students of flight. Their small apartment was filled with books, newspapers, and notebooks. They searched for every piece of information they could find about flying. They read about hot air balloons from the 1700s. They studied the gliders of Otto Lilienthal, the German inventor whose death had inspired them. They also read about Sir George Cayley, an English pioneer who had written about the principles of flight almost a century earlier. The more they read, the more questions they had. Why did so many early attempts at flight fail? What was missing? Could they discover the answers? Wilbur often wrote letters to universities, libraries, and even the government asking for information about flight. In 1899, he wrote to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. asking for all available literature on aeronautics. The Smithsonian sent him a package of scientific papers and books. For the brothers, it was like receiving treasure. Books were helpful, but the brothers also trusted their own eyes. Every day, they watched birds with deep concentration. They noticed how a bird tilted its wings slightly to one side to make a turn. They saw how birds used the wind to rise higher with little effort. They even noticed how different birds had different flying styles. Some flapped their wings quickly, while others glided smoothly for long distances. Wilbur said, "The birds are our teachers. They show us that human flight is possible. The only question is, can we learn their secrets?" These observations gave them an important idea: control was more important than power. Many inventors of the past had tried to build strong engines, believing that speed and strength were the keys to flying. But the Wright brothers saw that balance, stability, and control were the true secrets. By 1899, the brothers decided it was time to move from reading to experimenting. They built a small kite with wings that could be twisted, or warped, to change direction. When they tested it, the kite turned smoothly in the air. This experiment proved that their idea of wing warping could really work. It was a small step, but it gave them confidence. The Wright brothers realized that flying a machine was not just about lifting into the air. It was about controlling movement, turning left or right, rising or falling, keeping balance against the wind. Their curiosity was not only about science. It was also about emotion. They felt wonder, hope, and excitement whenever they thought about flying. But they also felt doubt. What if they failed, like so many others? What if people laughed at them? Still, their curiosity was stronger than their fear. They often told each other, "Even if we fail, we will learn something valuable." This emotional strength kept them moving forward when the future looked uncertain. After the success of their kite, the brothers began to dream bigger. They wanted to build a glider large enough for a person to ride. But where could they test it? Dayton was not the right place. The winds were not strong enough, and there was no open space for safe landings. They started searching for a better location. After writing to the U.S. Weather Bureau, they learned about a place called Kitty Hawk, in North Carolina. Kitty Hawk was a remote area with strong, steady winds and soft sand dunes, perfect for testing flying machines. The decision was not easy. Kitty Hawk was far from home. It was isolated, with few people, no hotels, and difficult living conditions. But the brothers were not afraid of hardship. Their curiosity was so strong that they were willing to leave their comfortable shop in Dayton and travel hundreds of miles to chase their dream. As they prepared for Kitty Hawk, the Wright brothers continued studying the work of other inventors. They respected men like Lilienthal and Cayley, but they also noticed mistakes. For example, many earlier inventors believed that simply adding a powerful engine would make a machine fly. The brothers disagreed. They believed that without control, an engine would only make crashes happen faster. They also saw that earlier inventors had not tested their theories enough. Some made calculations on paper but never built real models. Others built models but never measured their results carefully. The Wright brothers promised themselves that they would not repeat these mistakes. They would combine theory with practice, books with experiments, ideas with action. Curiosity is powerful, but it can also be dangerous if it turns into impatience. The Wright brothers knew they had to move slowly. They often reminded each other, step by step. This patience was not always easy. They sometimes felt the urge to rush, to build something big right away. But they knew that rushing could mean failure, or even death. They agreed that every experiment must teach them something new, even if it was small. Their patient curiosity built a strong foundation for the success that would come later. Back in Dayton, their father supported their work. Even though many people laughed at the idea of flying machines, Milton Wright encouraged his sons. He told them, "Do not listen to those who doubt you. If your heart tells you to continue, then continue." Their sisters also helped. Catherine Wright, their younger sister, believed deeply in her brothers. She often encouraged them when they felt tired or uncertain. Later, Catherine would become one of their greatest supporters in the public eye. The Wright brothers were never alone. They had each other, and they had a family that believed in them. This emotional support gave them strength for the difficult journey ahead. By the year 1900, the Wright brothers had made a decision. They would go to Kitty Hawk to test their first full-size glider. Their bicycle shop was still running, but their minds were full of flying machines. They were nervous, of course. They knew that their dream could end in failure. But their curiosity pushed them forward. Every question they asked, every answer they found, brought them closer to the sky. The power of curiosity had taken two brothers from Dayton, Ohio, to the edge of history. Soon, the world would hear the sound of wings built not by nature, but by human hands. In the year 1900, the Wright brothers were ready to test their first real flying machine. They had studied books, built kites, and filled notebooks with ideas. Now, it was time to see if their theories could work in the real world. But where could they fly safely? Dayton, their hometown, was not the right place. The land was flat, the winds were weak, and there were too many buildings. After much research, they chose a place called Kitty Hawk, in North Carolina. Kitty Hawk was a remote village on the coast. It was far away from cities and had wide open spaces of sand and grass. Strong winds blew almost every day, and soft sand made landing safer. To most people, Kitty Hawk seemed lonely and uncomfortable. But to the Wright brothers, it was perfect. Traveling to Kitty Hawk was not easy. In 1900, there were no highways, no airplanes, and few trains going near the coast. The brothers had to take several trains, a boat, and even walk with their supplies to reach the small village. When they arrived, they saw miles of sand dunes, the endless ocean, and a sky full of wind. The village itself was simple, wooden houses, fishermen, and not much more. But to Wilbur and Orville, the place felt like a workshop given to them by nature. The locals were curious about the two men from Ohio. Some laughed at the idea of a flying machine. Others were friendly and helped them carry supplies. The Wright brothers did not mind the jokes. They were used to people doubting them. The brothers set up a small wooden camp house near the dunes. It was basic, with little comfort, but they did not care. Their focus was on building. Their first glider, built in 1900, looked a little like a giant kite. It had two wings stacked on top of each other, connected by wooden frames. The wings were covered with cloth, and the brothers had designed it to be controlled by twisting, or warping, the wings. The glider did not have an engine. It was meant to be flown by the wind, with a pilot lying on the lower wing. When they carried the glider to the top of a sand dune, their hearts beat fast. This was the first time they would test a machine big enough to carry a person. Wilbur was the first to try. He lay flat on the lower wing, his hands holding the controls. Orville helped launch the glider into the wind. For a few seconds, the glider lifted into the air. It floated gently before sliding down into the sand. It was not a long flight, but it was proof that their ideas could work. The brothers took turns, sometimes flying the glider, sometimes helping launch it. Each time, they learned something new. They saw how the wind carried the wings, how the glider responded when they twisted the controls, and how balance was so delicate. Most of the flights were short, often only a few seconds. Sometimes the glider crashed into the sand. Sometimes the wind was too strong, pushing the glider off course. But every failure was also a lesson. Life at Kitty Hawk was not easy. The brothers had to cook simple meals, fix broken parts, and repair their camp in storms. Mosquitoes bit them at night, and strong winds sometimes damaged their equipment. Still, they never complained. Instead, they wrote long letters back home, describing their experiments in detail. They measured everything carefully, how far the glider flew, how high it rose, how it responded to different movements. After weeks of testing, they realized that their glider did not produce as much lift as they had expected. Their calculations, based on earlier inventors' data, were not accurate. Instead of feeling hopeless, they grew excited. They said to each other, "If the old numbers are wrong, then we must find the right ones ourselves." At the end of the 1900 season, the brothers returned to Dayton. They had not yet flown far, but they had gained valuable experience. They had touched the air, controlled a glider, and proven that their ideas about balance were correct. Back home, they continued their bicycle business while planning their next experiments. They built a wind tunnel, something very few inventors had done before. Inside this small wooden box, they tested hundreds of wing shapes, blowing air over them to measure lift and drag. For weeks, they worked like scientists, recording numbers, drawing graphs, and comparing results. Slowly, they built a new set of data, more accurate than anything before. Their curiosity was becoming real science. In 1901, the brothers returned to Kitty Hawk with a new, larger glider. This one had wider wings and better controls, based on their wind tunnel tests. Again, they set up camp among the sand dunes. Again, the locals came to watch. Some still doubted, but others began to respect the two quiet men who worked so hard. The new glider performed better, but it was still not perfect. The flights were longer, sometimes lasting almost a minute, but balance remained difficult. One day, after a series of crashes, Wilbur felt discouraged. He wrote to his father, saying that maybe humans would not fly for 50 years or more. For a moment, doubt was stronger than hope. But Orville reminded him, every failure teaches us. We are closer today than we were yesterday. Those words kept Wilbur going. By 1902, the brothers built yet another glider, their third one. This time, it had a new design, a movable tail to help with stability. This glider was a turning point. It responded smoothly to the controls, balanced better in the wind, and allowed them to make longer flights. Some flights lasted over 600 feet, which was a great achievement. For the first time, they felt that real, practical flight was possible. They had learned that success was not about luck, but about patience, observation, and persistence. These early attempts were more than scientific experiments. They were also an emotional journey. The brothers felt excitement when the glider lifted off, fear when it crashed, frustration when it failed, and joy when it worked. Each day at Kitty Hawk was a mix of hope and challenge. Some mornings they woke up tired, but as soon as they saw the dunes and the open sky, their energy returned. Their dream was no longer just a dream. It was becoming real, piece by piece, flight by flight. By the end of 1902, the brothers had solved the greatest problem of flight, control. They now believed that a machine could fly safely if it had the right engine. The next step was clear: they would build a flying machine not only with wings and controls, but also with its own power source. The age of gliders was ending, and the age of the airplane was about to begin. The world did not know it, but history was only 1 year away from the first powered flight. The year was 1903. After years of study, failures, and experiments, the Wright brothers were ready to try something new, a flying machine with its own engine. They had already learned how to glide. They had already discovered how to control movement in the air. Now, the only missing piece was power. Could they build a machine that not only floated in the wind, but also rose into the sky by itself? Back in their bicycle shop in Dayton, Wilbur and Orville began work on their new machine. It would be larger than their gliders, with wings more than 40 feet wide. They called it the Flyer. The Flyer needed an engine. But there was a problem: no engine in the world was light enough and powerful enough for their needs. Most engines were made for cars or factories, and they were far too heavy. So, once again, the brothers decided to build it themselves. With the help of a mechanic friend named Charlie Taylor, they designed a small gasoline engine. It produced just enough power to turn 2 wooden propellers, which they also designed by hand. When the Flyer was finished, it looked strange, like a giant box kite with wings, a tail, and a small engine. To many people, it seemed impossible that such a machine could fly. But to the Wright brothers, it was a dream finally taking shape. In September 1903, the brothers packed their new machine and traveled once again to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The journey was long and tiring, but their hearts were full of hope. When they arrived, they rebuilt their wooden camp house and carefully assembled the Flyer. Day by day, the strange machine grew, piece by piece, on the sandy dunes. Local villagers watched in wonder. Some thought the brothers were foolish, others were curious. By December, the flyer was ready. The brothers had tested it many times on the ground, checking every bolt, every wire, every piece of wood. But they still did not know if it would rise into the air. On December 14, 1903, they were ready to try. Wilbur won a coin toss and climbed onto the flyer. With the engine running, the propellers began to spin. The machine started moving down a wooden track they had built on the sand. For a moment, it lifted into the air. But after just 3 seconds, it stalled and fell into the sand. The flyer was damaged, but not destroyed. Many people might have given up after such a failure. But the Wright brothers did not. They repaired the machine, adjusted the controls, and prepared for another attempt. The morning of December 17, 1903, was cold and windy. The sky was gray, and the sand was frozen with frost. But the conditions were perfect for flying. Orville was chosen to try first this time. The flyer was placed on the wooden track, its nose facing the strong wind. The brothers shook hands, wishing each other good luck. At 10:35 a.m. Orville started the engine. The propeller spun, and the machine moved slowly forward. Wilbur ran alongside, holding the wing to keep it steady. Then, suddenly, the flyer lifted off the track. It rose into the air, just a few feet above the ground, but it was flying. For 12 seconds, the machine stayed in the air, traveling 120 feet before gently landing in the sand. For the first time in human history, a powered, controlled airplane had flown. The brothers were thrilled, but they did not stop. They quickly reset the flyer and tried again. In the second flight, Wilbur flew 175 feet. In the third, Orville flew 200 feet, and in the fourth flight of the day, Wilbur stayed in the air for 59 seconds, traveling 852 feet across the sand. Each flight was short, but each one was proof the dream of flying had come true. There were only 5 local men who witnessed the flights that day, 2 lifesavers from the nearby coast, a boy from the village, and a few others. They helped move the machine and took turns watching with amazement. One of the witnesses took a photograph of the first flight. In the picture, Orville is lying on the flyer while Wilbur runs beside it. That photograph became one of the most famous images in history. After the flights, the brothers sent a telegram to their father in Dayton. It read, "Success. For flights Thursday morning. Longest 59 seconds." Their father was proud, though at first, very few people believed the news. The brothers felt joy, pride, and relief. Years of hard work, late nights, and endless failures had finally led to success. But they also felt something else, responsibility. They knew that their invention could change the world. People would travel faster, explore farther, and connect more easily. But they also worried that airplanes might be used in war or for harm. Still, in that moment, their hearts were filled with wonder. They had given humanity wings. Although they had succeeded, life did not suddenly become easy. Back in Dayton, many people doubted their claims. Some newspapers refused to publish the story, thinking it was just another failed experiment. But the Wright brothers did not mind. They knew the truth, and they knew that time would prove them right. They returned home, improved their designs, and prepared for even greater flights. Their first flight was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. On that cold December morning in 1903, the world quietly changed. Most people did not notice at first, but in time everyone would feel the impact. The Wright brothers' machine had flown. And because of that, the world would never be the same again. The Wright brothers had done it. On December 17, 1903, they had flown the first powered, controlled airplane in human history. But the world did not immediately celebrate. In fact, almost nobody believed them. When they returned to Dayton, Ohio, they told their friends and neighbors what had happened. Some listened politely, but most were doubtful. How could 2 bicycle makers fly when great scientists and universities had failed? The brothers had photographs, notes, and the famous telegram. But in 1903, news traveled slowly. Newspapers in Ohio and across the United States ignored their story. Some papers even laughed at the idea. One article said, "Men flying in machines? Nonsense. If humans were meant to fly, they would have been born with wings." For Wilbur and Orville, this disbelief was painful. They had worked so hard, risked their lives, and achieved something historic, yet almost no one cared. Still, the brothers did not give up. They knew the truth. They had seen their machine rise into the air with their own eyes. They decided to keep working, keep improving, and let time prove them right. Back in their bicycle shop, the Wright brothers returned to building, testing, and experimenting. They were not only inventors, but also businessmen. They understood that for their airplane to be respected, it had to be more than a short flight in the sand. It needed to be reliable, repeatable, and useful. In 1904, they built a new flyer and tested it near Dayton. This time, they invited local witnesses. The flights were longer, but the machine was still difficult to control. Many who watched left unimpressed. In 1905, they tried again, building the Flyer 3. This time, their invention finally worked as they had dreamed. Wilbur flew for 39 minutes, circling the field many times before landing safely. It was the first truly practical airplane in history. Now, there was no doubt, the Wright brothers had built a real flying machine. But success at home was still slow. The U.S. government showed little interest. Military leaders said airplanes were only toys and had no use in war. Politicians ignored their letters. Frustrated, the brothers looked abroad. In France, people were fascinated by the idea of flight. French inventors and engineers were already building their own machines, but none had flown as well as the Wrights' Flyer. In 1907, Wilbur traveled to France to demonstrate their airplane. The French public was skeptical at first. Some scientists even said the Wrights were liars, but when Wilbur finally took off in front of thousands of people, circling the air with ease, the crowd was astonished. The newspapers that once mocked them now called the Wright brothers geniuses. France welcomed them as heroes. By 1908, the Wright brothers were famous in both Europe and America. Governments began to take interest. The U.S. Army finally asked for a demonstration. Businessmen offered contracts. Suddenly, the brothers were not just inventors, they were pioneers in a new industry. But fame came with challenges. Other inventors rushed to copy their designs. Some accused the Wrights of stealing ideas, while others tried to claim they had flown first. Legal battles filled their days, and criticism followed them wherever they went. Still, they remained calm and determined. Wilbur once said, "Do not let yourself be forced into doing things you know are wrong. Stand firm even if you stand alone." These words showed their character. They were not interested in easy fame, they wanted recognition only for the truth. Fame also changed their personal lives. The quiet, private brothers were suddenly surrounded by journalists, politicians, and crowds. They traveled from country to country, giving demonstrations and meeting important people. In France, they flew before the kings of England and Spain. In America, they met President Theodore Roosevelt. Everywhere they went, people wanted to shake their hands, take their pictures, and call them men of the century. But this life was exhausting. Both brothers were simple men at heart. They loved their workshop, their tools, and the quiet evenings in Dayton. Public attention made them uncomfortable. Orville once admitted, "I prefer machines to men." Behind the smiles and handshakes, the brothers often felt tired, lonely, and misunderstood. Through all of this, one thing remained constant, their bond as brothers. They trusted each other completely. When one spoke, the other supported him. When one flew, the other stayed on the ground, watching carefully and ready to help. They also remained close to their sister, Catherine Wright, who became their strongest supporter. Catherine managed their letters, organized their schedules, and stood by them through the difficult years of fame. Some historians even say that without Catherine, the brothers might never have succeeded. Their father, Milton Wright, lived long enough to see their success. He was proud of his sons, not only because they had invented the airplane, but because they had stayed true to their values of honesty, humility, and hard work. One of the most emotional moments of their journey happened in France in 1908. Wilbur flew at Le Mans, performing circles, turns, and figure eights in the air. The crowd of thousands watched in silence, then exploded with cheers. Many people cried, realizing they were seeing something historic. One French journalist wrote, "When Wilbur Wright flies, you forget everything else. The machine disappears. All you see is a man, soaring gracefully through the air, like a bird." At last, the Wright brothers felt what they had waited for so long: recognition, respect, and admiration. By 1909, the Wright brothers had contracts with both the French government and the U.S. Army. They had proved their invention to the world. Airplanes were no longer toys. They were tools of the future. People now called Wilbur and Orville the fathers of flight. Their story spread across the globe, inspiring dreamers and inventors everywhere. Yet, even with all this success, the brothers never forgot their simple beginnings. They remained modest. When asked about their achievements, Wilbur once said, "We were lucky enough to grow up in a home where there was always much encouragement to children to pursue intellectual interests, to investigate whatever aroused curiosity. It was not luck, of course, but the combination of curiosity, courage, and perseverance. The invention of the airplane began to change everything. What once seemed impossible, crossing oceans, traveling to distant lands in hours, was now within reach. The Wright brothers had opened the door to a new world. A world where people could connect across great distances. A world where travel was faster, trade was easier, and dreams of exploration were endless. The world had doubted them. The world had laughed at them. But in the end, the world had to accept the truth: the Wright brothers had given humanity wings. By the year 1909, the Wright brothers were no longer unknown bicycle makers from Dayton. They were international figures, celebrated in Europe, respected in America, and admired across the world. But with recognition came new challenges, personal struggles, and eventually, the question every great inventor faces: what will our legacy be? After their success in France and America, Wilbur and Orville spent years traveling, demonstrating their airplanes, and training others. They worked with the French government, the U.S. Army, and business partners who wanted to build and sell airplanes. Crowds gathered wherever they flew. For many people, watching the Wright brothers in the air was the most extraordinary sight of their lives. Some gasped, some clapped, and some even cried. To them, the brothers seemed like magicians. But behind the excitement, life became complicated. They had to protect their invention through patents, court cases, and constant competition. Other inventors rushed to build airplanes, sometimes copying the Wrights' designs without permission. The brothers spent as much time in courtrooms as in workshops. Orville once said, with some sadness, "We wanted to fly, not to argue in court." Wilbur Wright, the older brother, was the more serious and intellectual of the two. He was also the one most involved in defending their patents and negotiating contracts. His sharp mind and strong character made him an excellent leader. But in 1912, tragedy struck. While on a business trip to Boston, Wilbur became ill with typhoid fever, a disease caused by dirty water. After weeks of suffering, he passed away at only 45 years old. His death was a terrible blow. Orville was devastated. For his whole life, he and Wilbur had worked side by side, sharing dreams, failures, and triumphs. Now, Orville was alone. Their father, Milton Wright, wrote in his diary, "A short life, full of consequences. An unfailing intellect, imperturbable temper, great self-reliance, and as great modesty. A true example of a great man." The world also mourned. Newspapers in Europe and America praised Wilbur as a genius, a pioneer, and a man of courage. After Wilbur's death, Orville continued the work. He became the head of the Wright Company, which built airplanes for the military and for businesses. But his heart was never the same. He missed his brother deeply. Orville was a brilliant engineer, but he was less comfortable in the world of business and politics. After a few years, he sold the Wright Company and returned to a quieter life. He preferred his workshop, where he could experiment, build, and invent at his own pace. Still, Orville lived long enough to see how far aviation had come. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, airplanes played a major role for the first time. At first, they were used for watching enemy movements. Later, they carried weapons. The invention that the Wright brothers had dreamed would connect the world was now being used in battle. Orville felt proud of their achievement but also worried about its consequences. He once admitted, "In 1903 we thought one of the great blessings of the airplane would be its use in avoiding wars. But we were wrong." At the same time, airplanes also brought hope and progress. They carried mail across countries, connected distant cities, and allowed explorers to reach places once impossible to visit. By the 1920s and 1930s, commercial airlines were beginning to take shape. People could travel across continents in hours instead of weeks. The dream of flight was no longer fantasy. It was part of everyday life. Orville became something of a symbol for aviation. He received visitors, gave interviews, and answered questions about the early days of flying. Pilots and engineers admired him, and ordinary people respected his modesty. In 1928, a group of admirers moved the original 1903 flyer to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Orville was proud, but also careful. He wanted the world to know the true story of how he and Wilbur had succeeded, not myths, not exaggerations, but the facts. In 1939, Orville saw another milestone, the first flight of a jet-powered airplane. He was amazed at how far aviation had progressed in just 36 years. From 12 seconds in the air at Kitty Hawk to speeds faster than sound, the progress seemed unbelievable. When asked about this, Orville smiled and said, "I once thought the limits of flight had been reached. But it seems there are no limits." Orville lived until 1948, passing away at the age of 76. By that time, airplanes were everywhere: military bombers, passenger planes, cargo transports. The world had been transformed by the dream that he and Wilbur had once shared as boys with a small toy helicopter. When Orville died, newspapers around the world honored him. One headline read, "The last of the Wrights, father of flight, dies." The legacy of the Wright brothers is not only about airplanes. It is about human spirit. They showed the power of curiosity, how a child's wonder at a toy could grow into a life-changing invention. They showed the power of perseverance, how years of failure, crashes, and doubt could not stop them. They showed the power of teamwork, how two brothers, different in personality but united in trust, could achieve the impossible. Today, every airplane in the sky carries a part of their dream. Every passenger who flies across an ocean, every pilot who takes off into the clouds, every child who looks up at the sky and imagines flying owes something to Wilbur and Orville Wright. Think about this: in 1903, the Wright brothers flew for just 12 seconds. In 1969, only 66 years later, humans walked on the moon. The path from Kitty Hawk to space exploration began with two brothers who believed in their dream. Without the Wrights, history might have been very different. The Wright brothers' story continues to inspire people today: students, inventors, dreamers, and anyone who faces challenges. Their journey teaches us that failure is not the end. It is a lesson. Dreams may seem impossible, but with patience and hard work, they can become reality. Ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. Wilbur and Orville were not rich, not powerful, and not university-trained engineers. They were bicycle makers from Ohio. But they changed the world. The Wright brothers gave us more than a machine. They gave us a vision of what humans could do. They proved that courage, imagination, and determination could lift us into the sky. Their story is not just history, it is a reminder that we, too, can rise above challenges, chase our dreams, and leave behind a legacy that touches the world. And so, every time an airplane takes off, every time we hear the roar of engines above, we are witnessing the living echo of that cold morning in December 1903, when two brothers taught humanity to fly. And that is the story of the Wright brothers, two ordinary men with an extraordinary dream. From a small toy helicopter in their childhood, to the first powered airplane in 1903, to changing the future of the entire world, Their story reminds us that with curiosity, courage, and hard work, even the impossible can become real. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more inspiring real-life stories in slow and clear English, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep learning, keep dreaming, and remember, your wings are waiting.